The famous 19th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham has several claims to fame. He was the father of a philosophy that we call utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham says that when you try and figure out the right thing to do, don't worry about right and wrong. That's passé. We don't worry about that anymore. You just worry about what's most useful. What's the thing that you can do that will be most useful to the greatest number of people, and that's what you should do. It's called utilitarianism. One of the other things he's known for is that when he passed away in 1832, he had accumulated a vast fortune from his writings. And he left all of his money to the University College Hospital in London, England, under one condition. They would have all of his money, all of his estate, all of his property under one condition. He wanted to keep attending the board of directors meeting after he was dead. And so his body was to be preserved. In every quarter, when there's a board of directors meeting, his body is dressed up in a formal business suit and he's seated near the head of the table of the board of directors. That was the condition. Bentham was trying to achieve immortality. Apparently, they still do it. They still use the money of his investments, and he still attends every board meeting. It's a trend that has taken several steps forward into the 19th and the 20th century. Robert Ettinger is known as the father of modern cryogenics. In his book called The Prospect of Immortality, he suggested that as medical science advances, one day we'll be able to heal all of the diseases that take our lives, and so we should all be frozen at the moment of our death so that when they find the cure of whatever illness we have, they can thaw us out and cure us and we can live forever. And so when he died on the 23rd of July, 2011, Robert Ettinger's body was cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen. The Cryogenic Institute that he founded can preserve your body for the small sum of $200,000. Or if you prefer, they can preserve just your brain for $80,000. And presumably one day when science will have advanced far enough, they can create a robotic body in which they can implant your brain and your memories. It is perhaps not surprising that the list of famous people who've been preserved this way include a number of wealthy sports personalities and celebrities. But cryogenics aren't the only method we use in the hopes of achieving immortality. From Botox to anti-aging serums and facelifts, from vitality medicines and exercise regimes to fad paleolithic diets, human beings will try just about anything in an effort to live just a little bit longer, or even just to make it look like you're going to live a little longer. I'm told some people are desperate enough to live a little bit longer that they're actually willing to eat kale and tofu and exercise an hour a day. You really have to be committed to do those things. I suppose that for many people, part of the intrigue of our Easter celebration is the promise of resurrection, of new life, and immortality. And for a few minutes this morning, I want to consider just a very short text that speaks of the promise of immortality and new life. Just 3 verses found in Colossians 2. Colossians 2, starting at verse 13. In you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive, together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Many of you are aware that when I prepare the Sunday morning and Sunday evening sermons and Bible text, I map things out several weeks and months in advance. I have a big monster spreadsheet where I lay out everything that's coming. And back at the beginning of March, when I sent out the list of Bible passages and themes for the Sunday services through Lent to Eli and the choir so they could plan the choir pieces and a couple people who work on the PowerPoint, I got a couple surprises back. And a few of them were surprised that on Easter Sunday, I was going to speak about the cross. This whole series through Lent, we've been looking at texts in the epistles where Paul and Peter and John and the others speak about the cross. And when I sent out the list and noted that this morning we want to talk about the way something would be nailed to the cross, a couple of people said, really, it's Easter Sunday. We want to speak about the cross during Lent. We want to speak about the cross on Maundy Thursday. We want to speak about the cross on Good Friday. But why would you speak about the cross on Easter Sunday morning? Well, there's a reason for that. Our texts in Colossians 2 and several other texts in the New Testament make an unmistakable, an unbreakable link between the empty tomb and the cross. Paul reminds the Colossians in verse 13 that they were dead and God has made them alive. Now, at first, that sounds like an Easter Sunday morning kind of promise. It's about resurrection and a new life. This is something that we celebrate on Easter Sunday, people being dead and coming back to life. But strangely, Paul doesn't say that it's on Easter Sunday morning that we came back to life. Paul says you've been made alive not by something that happened on Sunday morning, but by something that happened on Friday afternoon. Let me explain. Paul isn't talking about medical death. Our problem does eventually include medical death, but it begins with another death, a spiritual death. Paul says we weren't dead in our cancer. He doesn't say we were dead in our illnesses. He says we were dead in our trespasses. We've not been killed by cancer or sclerosis or by a drunk driver on the highway. We were dead in our trespasses. From the early chapters of Genesis, when Adam and Eve first faced the consequences of their disobedience, to the final chapters of Revelation where judgment eventually comes, we learn about a very close link between sin and death. The wages of our sin, the consequences of our rebellion against our Creator is both spiritual death that wasn't meant to be and physical death that wasn't meant to be either. And in order to be made alive again, the problem of sin has to be dealt with. And Paul says that there's 3 sin-related problems that have to be dealt with. First, there's the fact that we've committed sins. We have trespassed. There are things we have done that condemn us to the penalty of death. God needs to deal with this, and He does that by providing forgiveness. And forgiveness comes through the cross of Christ. And then secondly, Paul refers to the law that continues to prove that we're broken and according which we continue to sin and to come short. And Paul uses an unusual Greek word that is like an IOU that we accumulate. As we continue to break the law every day, we continue to break the legal demands of the law every day, every night, every evening, all the time. Paul says that there is this big, massive, huge IOU that we continue to accumulate every day. And Paul says, God dealt with that by nailing that IOU to the cross of Jesus. I like the word that Paul uses here, actually. It's sort of the word for an IOU, but it was used as another context. When a criminal was crucified or hung on the gallows above his head or on the cross above his head, they would put a little sign that would explain why this person was being convicted and condemned to death. And that's what Paul refers to. And so he says that we know that the little piece of paper that would put above Jesus' head mocked him and said, "This is the King of the Jews." But Paul said, really, that's not the only thing that was nailed to the cross. Nailed to the cross was a piece of paper, an IOU, the debt that stood against us. And that's taken out of the way because on Good Friday at the cross, that was nailed to Jesus' cross. And then we have a third problem with sin. It's not just that I've committed sins that need to be forgiven. It's not just that I keep committing sins that need to be dealt with. The problem is there's a power at stake here. There's the powers of evil and the devil that keep coming at me. And Paul says that at the cross, Jesus triumphed over them. And he's actually very ironically specific as he describes that process. When the religious leaders and the civil authorities sent Jesus to his death, acting on behalf of the devil and the powers of evil, as they mocked him and abused Jesus, they stripped him naked to die in shame and exposure. They thought they were triumphing over him. But Paul says, in fact, at the cross, it's the reverse that was happening. Paul says that as Jesus goes to the cross, he has stripped all the powers and rulers and authorities of all of their powers. And at the cross, he's not the one being put to shame. They are. He's not the one being overpowered. They are. He was putting them to shame because overcoming them not with a valiant, powerful army or with a great blast of cosmic power rays. He was actually triumphing over them in the weakness of his human flesh, going to the cross to die. Forgive the illusion, but you know when little boys in the schoolyard argue about whose dad has the fastest, inevitably one of them say, "Well, my dad can take your dad. Well, my dad can take your dad with one arm tied behind his back. Well, my dad can take your dad down with both arms tied behind his back." Jesus took on the powers of evil and the devil with both feet and both hands nailed to the cross. He disarmed them. He put them to shame. He triumphed over them by the cross. Now, some people would like to leave that part about the cross out of the Sunday morning Easter story. There has been a tendency among liberal theologians to focus on a theory of the redemption that focuses on the victorious overcoming of the powers of evil. And this theory suggests that the problem really is not you and me. The problem is that there's all these powers of evil, and if only Christ could come and conquer the powers of evil, we'd be okay. A couple years ago, I remember talking to a teacher, and I was helping out Debbie at the school a little bit, and parent-teacher interview was coming, and one of the teachers there had several troubled children in the class who were causing trouble in the class. And she said it was really uncanny. As all of the parents came to meet her at parent-teacher interviews, all of the parents said, well, my kids are really good. It's the other bad kids in the class that make them do bad stuff. And she said it was funny. None of the parents actually come and say, well, yeah, I'm the parent of the bad kids in the class that make everybody else mess up. Everybody else, their kids are brought, by somebody else's kids. The other, if you can... And there's this feeling that when Christ dies at the cross, well, there's this other problem that's outside of us. There's the devil, and he's really the problem. We just need a new chance at life, and we'll be okay. But Paul insists in verse 13 that we're not dead because of somebody else's sin. Did you notice the pronouns? He tells the Colossians in verse 13, you were dead in your trespasses. He doesn't say you were dead in trespasses. He doesn't just say you were dead in sin. He says you were dead in your trespasses. There can be no Easter Sunday morning without Good Friday. And there can be no empty tomb without the cross. Because the empty tomb celebrates redemption and new life. And before new life comes, the dead have to be brought back to life. And the dead are brought back to life by what happened at the cross on Good Friday. If there was no cross on Good Friday, there could be no empty tomb on Easter Sunday morning. But now here's the part that really surprises me. When people pick and choose what part of the Bible they want to keep, I can understand that some people would like to hear the Easter story and hear about the power and the victory of the empty tomb and not hear about the cross, because the cross is gruesome and it's dark and it's bloody and it's awful. And I can understand people who'd like to hear about Easter and hear about the empty tomb and the risen Lord, but not hear anything about the cross on Good Friday. That doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is that there are countless people who are quite ready to tell you stories about the cross, but then when you want to talk about the empty tomb, they say, well, I don't know about that, People coming back alive? But see, you can't do that. Because if the death of the one who goes to the cross is going to be meaningful at all, he can't just stay dead. If the one who goes to the cross and dies remains in the tomb, then he was just another ordinary human being, and the cross is empty and powerless. It doesn't have the power we need it to have. If the one who went to the cross provided forgiveness at the cross, he can't be an ordinary person who stays dead after we kill him. If the one who went to the cross canceled the record of debt against us with its legal demands that was nailed to the cross, he can't just be another ordinary human being who dies and stays in the grave like everybody else. And most importantly, if the one who went to the cross disarmed powers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them, he can't just have been another ordinary human being. You can't have the cross without the empty tomb, and you can't have the empty tomb without the cross. I suspect that several of you, like me, have also been watching the Artemis space mission to the moon. I sort of get the goosebumps as I've watched it. I'm going to show you how old I am, but one of my very first memories, when I was almost 4 years old, was huddling around a little 12-inch black and white television on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took the first historic steps of man on the surface of the moon. We didn't have a television till that weekend, and Dad thought this was so historic that his kids needed to see this. So Dad went to the local television store. We rented a little 12-inch black and white TV for $4 a month. Brought it home, we set it up with little rabbit ears and aluminum foil to get Channel 6 and Channel 12 all the way from Montreal into townships. And it was the first thing I ever watched on TV was the lunar landing. And I've been sort of a space buff ever since. When I eventually moved to Montreal as a student and needed a part-time job, one of my first part-time jobs, I got to lecture school groups at the planetarium with the big Zeiss projector under the sky dome. Used to tease my dad. My dad had this $800 car, and he wouldn't let me touch his $800 car in case I wrecked it. And I told him, Dad, every weekend I play around with a $2 million Zeiss projector. You know, this is... And I never forget his answer. He says, yeah, but they've got it insured. And for those of us who remember, it gives us excitement and goosebumps as we see Artemis 2. But I've had this little tinge of sadness about the poor guys on Artemis 2. The crew will be traveling just a little over 1 million kilometers by the time they come back next Thursday, Friday, day 10, whenever they come back. They will have traveled over 1 million kilometers. Think about this a little bit. You know, I know people that I've driven to Toronto and back to, and at the end of, Toronto and back, I was ready to, but think about being with 4 guys in a space capsule that tiny for 1 million kilometers over 10 days. They're going to travel over 1 million kilometers, and when they get to the moon, do you know how close they're coming to the moon? 6,000 kilometers, just a little more than the width of Canada. And they're not stopping to get out of the moon. And part of me is going, wow, can you imagine going 1 million kilometers and coming this close to the moon? You can almost smell it and touch it, and you're not going to get out and get out. I thought, feels like a little disappointing. And I was thinking about all those people who are willing to accept all the great things Jesus did in the power of the cross, in all that he did. And they're this close, but the resurrection, I don't know about that. Accepting that Jesus did all of that, but coming just short and not accepting the resurrection feels to me about as pointless as traveling 1 million kilometers to the moon and not actually getting out. And that's why on this Easter Sunday morning, I didn't want to speak to you just about the empty tomb. I had to speak to you about the cross again one more time. Because without the cross, the empty tomb is meaningless. And without the empty tomb, the cross is meaningless. You can't have one without the other. There's no cross without the empty tomb, and there's no empty tomb without the cross. Thanks be to God. There was the cross, and there was an empty tomb, because he is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.